So I still can't believe Capcom decided to actually bring back this survival horror game. Now, for those of you that haven't caught on to the game that I'm going to be talking about in today's video, that's Onimusha Way of the Sword that recently got released. And for those of you that don't know what Onimusha is and are basically asking the question, what does this have to do with Resident Evil? Why should I care? Well, that's a good question. And to answer it, Onimusha is basically Resident Evil, but with like samurais. So it's essentially set in the Sengoku period in Japan, which is roughly around 1560. And fun fact, the director of the first Onimusha game, Onimusha Warlords, was actually Jun Takuichi. Now, if that name does sound familiar, it's because Jun Takuichi has been with Capcom for the longest time. He's basically been a part of like all of the Resident Evil remakes, and even before, I'm pretty sure he was the producer or director for Resident Evil 5. He's basically been with the series since day one. I don't know like the specifics, but Jun Takuichi is a Resident Evil guy that's worked for Capcom since, you know, a long time. And for those of you that don't know what the story of Onimusha Warlords is, it's essentially a story of a samurai by the name of Samanosuke who gets sent to essentially go save the princess that's on top of a Japanese castle, but the castle is literally overrun by a bunch of creatures called Genmas, aka they're essentially demons is what the game refers to. The game also has fixed camera angles, which is exactly like Resident Evil. Not to mention, I did read that Onimusha, that the whole idea of it basically stemmed from them trying to make a Resident Evil game, but set in the past during like the 1560s, you know, early, like I guess Renaissance kind of time, but in Japan, so very samurai heavy. Yeah, Resident Evil in samurai times. That's basically what they wanted to do. So not to mention, as you're going through the whole castle, you're basically fighting a bunch of monsters. You know, obviously it's not like Resident Evil with BOWs and stuff, but you're basically fighting a bunch of monsters from Japanese mythology. Honestly, Onimusha is very on the supernatural side, but the whole basic premise of the game is very kind of one-to-one to Resident Evil. You know, you're going through this Japanese castle, it's in fixed camera angles. Obviously in Onimusha you don't have guns like in Resident Evil, but the game does a fantastic job of kind of adding its own combat system that's all about parrying. It is worth noting you could go throughout the whole game kind of just swinging like a doofus, but the game does encourage you to essentially be patient and wait for the enemy to attack to essentially give a kill blow. On top of that mechanic, there's also another, like a different type of parry where you're essentially block and then the enemy kind of opens up and then you slash them and you do massive amounts of damage to not only that enemy, but any enemy that's like in the way. So if you guys don't know anything about the Onimusha series, I highly recommend it. There's so much Resident Evil similarities. So if you love Resident Evil, you gotta play Onimusha. Not to mention, there's also, as you're going through the whole castle, the general vibes, like the music and stuff, it's very similar to the music that can be found, you know, in several mansions, Resident Evil Code Veronica or Resident Evil 1, 2, you know, 3, like in R.P.D. and stuff. It's very like you'll get it right away. Like as soon as you go into the Japanese castle, you'll kind of get the same kind of vibe. There's also traps in the there's one section of the game that has like a bunch of traps, which again is very similar to any mansion that you go to in Resident Evil. There's one puzzle as well that kind of sucks. I ain't gonna lie, that puzzle literally sucks, but that puzzle, yeah, you can tell it was reused in OG RE4 just a couple years later, since Onimusha Warlords did release in 2001, and then obviously Resident Evil 4 did release in 2005. Just a couple years, they basically reused the same stupid Ashley puzzle. That puzzle was originally in Onimusha. One can definitely ascertain that Onimusha definitely had a lot of the Resident Evil programmers and, you know, guys essentially just working on that game and kind of working on, you know, later Resident Evil games. So, but that's essentially the general gist of the OG game. The very first one that did release again in 2018, and that was basically the last time that I essentially played an Onimusha game. Specifically 2019, I was trying to get a platinum on it. I only have a couple more trophies, so let me know down in the comments if you guys want me to stream that. That would be kind of hype, not gonna lie. But going back to this game, this announcement was wild. Like, I had no idea that Capcom was essentially gonna do this, but now that I think about it, Capcom creators did actually let everybody know that there was a Netflix show that released, like, I think maybe like a year ago, or I guess now 2 years ago. Yeah, I never watched that. I don't know what happened with the marketing, but the marketing for Onimusha was kind of like I remember seeing the trailer, but I didn't know when the show actually released. So I definitely have to check that out to kind of see the new vibes. I wouldn't be surprised if the story for the Netflix show actually ties in with this new protagonist in Onimusha Way of the Sword. Now, the only thing we know about Onimusha Way of the Sword is that it is set in the Edo period, which essentially takes place from, I think, 1609 to like 18 something, 1868. I'm gonna guess that. I don't remember the actual numbers, but anyways, and it's basically set in the old capital of Japan, aka Kyoto. The description says that Kyoto is overrun by Genma, aka demons, and yeah, you're basically a samurai who has the gauntlet and is basically gonna essentially kick ass. Like that's that's basically the trailer. That's everything we've essentially seen. The other thing I want to mention as well is that the trailer looked freaking beautiful, dude. Like the graphics for the Rex engine was freaking top tier, man. Like it reminded me of like all of the lighting that we've seen recently with like DRDR or Monster Hunter Wilds, but like the graphics look freaking like buttery smooth, man. Like it looks beautiful. Now, the last thing we know about the game is that it is actually releasing in 2026. And it is like 100 years after Onimusha Warlords, or I guess Onimusha 3. But, you know, for those of you that don't know, that's actually how I got into the series for Onimusha, was with Onimusha 3. And Onimusha 3 had something very interesting. They essentially had, you know, Samanosuke, the original main character of the first one, essentially go to like the future, like in present time Paris. And the second protagonist was a very famous French actor who I haven't seen in movies in like a long time. It was really cool to see that actor was a playable character. He was basically in the present. Samanosuke came from the past. It kind of just, you know, begs the question, is Samanosuke gonna make a return in this one? Obviously, we're playing as a new guy. But anyways, all that to say is it would be really cool if Samanosuke kind of helped out the new protagonist in this new Onimusha game. You know what I mean? Like, it would be fantastic. So, I don't know, it's definitely a possibility. They have played with time travel, with like the spiritual stuff, you know what I mean? So it could happen. That would be freaking sick. Can you imagine seeing freaking our boy Samanosuke freaking back? Sheesh, like, bro, like, no, Capcom needs to chill, bro. Like, that would be amazing. But anyways, now going back to what I was saying at the beginning, I find it very interesting that Capcom is essentially bringing back this series. Not to mention, I think what a lot of companies are doing nowadays to kind of see if people have interest in their games is to go with remakes, right? But I think Capcom is doing something sneaky. I have a slight suspicion that Capcom is using this as an experiment to see, hey, do Capcom fans actually, are they actually going to pay money to play this game? And if so, if it is successful, I think they're going to use the same kind of combat system that they use for this new iteration of Onimusha, and they could do remakes for Onimusha 1, Onimusha 2, Onimusha 3, Onimusha 4, but with this new combat system, which I think would be sick. I honestly think that Capcom could end up bringing back all of the Onimushas, kind of like what they've been doing with Resident Evil. And obviously, I think they're testing the waters with Onimusha Way of the Sword, which is just like, I don't know, like, guys, I'm like about to jump out of my chair. This is like super hype. I wouldn't doubt if Capcom also experimented and brought freaking Dino Crisis or another Dead Rising game. You know, like this is like, Capcom fans are eating good, man. Like, I'm super hyped. And obviously, since we haven't had any official news for Resident Evil, I mean, you guys saw that I didn't cover the Game Awards, since I was actually, you know, sure that we weren't going to get anything showcased during that. So 2025 seems pretty empty right now. But I wouldn't be surprised if Capcom also gives us, you know, some news on the next Resident Evil, whether that be a Resident Evil, a spin-off game, a Resident Evil remake, or Resident Evil 9. We still have a long time for that, right? But speaking of Resident Evil, click this video right here if you guys want to see more Resident Evil discussion on what we can expect for 2025 for Resident Evil. And also let me know down in the comments if you guys want me to stream Onimusha. Should I stream it? Should I make more content about it? Let me know down in the comments, because you know what? All this talking about Onimusha has kind of made me hype. Like, I'm super hyped. But anyways, thank you so much for watching.